it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read recently. So as per usual, this will be spoiler free, so don't worry if you haven't read any of the books, and I will also have timestamps in the description box down below in case there was a particular book that you wanted to skip to, but I will pick up the pile now. So these are the books that I'm going to be talking about today. This is more than I usually would talk about in a single video, but quite a few of these were actually DNFs, and I decided to throw in a couple of my Colleen Hoover reads because I'm filming my Colleen Hoover reading vlog right now, which will be up on Monday, but I don't want to do like my next recent reads video will literally just be Colleen Hoover, so I'm trying to, you know, split it up a little bit. But yeah, I will be talking about all of these books, timestamps in the description box down below, and no spoilers, so let's just get to it. So the first book that I'll be talking about, and these are really in no particular order, I'm just going to be kind of picking them up, but the first book that I have read recently is Weather Girl by Lynn Solomon. This is by the author of Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, which is a YA contemporary, but this is actually my first adult novel by her, and this is an adult romance, and it's not her first adult romance. She has one called The X Talk, which deals with like radio hosts, which is kind of interesting because this one is dealing with TV personalities. So the main character is a meteorologist, and she is working with her idol from when she was a kid, essentially. She ends up teaming up with the sports newscaster to get their bosses, which one of them is her idol, to get them back together because they used to be married, and then there's just been a lot of drama. So I thought this was really cute, and to preface this, I was fascinated by the weather when I was a child, I think because I was so afraid like of tornadoes and stuff like that. I just used to watch the Weather Network for hours on end, so I could really relate to her love of weather, honestly. It was a different reasoning, but it was still kind of funny to read something about that. And I did enjoy all of the weather-related puns in here and everything. I did find the story to be a little bit slow, however. I kind of felt like it was like dragging its feet a little bit. Like there were things happening, and I thought that the twist was really cute. Like I didn't see it coming, but I enjoyed it a lot. But I just felt like there could have been a little bit more happening with their chemistry. I think this is the first adult romance that I've read in a while that doesn't really adhere to any tropes. Like it probably does have some, but usually you have tropes like enemies to lovers or friends to lovers or fake dating, and those are kind of the hooks to pull you into the story. But this one doesn't really have that. It's just kind of a coworker romance, which I guess is probably a trope in itself, but it's just two coworkers who like they don't have really any history. They've been working together and then they end up starting a relationship. So it felt really realistic in that way. I think that Lynn Solomon is a really great writer. I love that she writes Jewish characters, and that's always very prevalent in her stories, and this one was no exception, and it was really lovely to have that addition to it again as well. And I did feel their chemistry. Like I don't want to be misinterpreted. I felt like they did have chemistry. I guess I just kind of was a little bit bored with where the story was going for quite a bit of it, and maybe it was just a me problem. I don't think it was a bad book by any means. It was like a really cute, solid romance, and it was perfect for when I was reading it because I was reading it when it was like really rainy outside for like a week straight. It just seemed like the perfect time to read it because the main character also loves the rain and was going on about the rain and everything. And yeah, I had a good time reading this one. I would be interested to read her other adult romance that she has, but I thought this one was fun, and it was a good like introduction to her in the adult romance universe, I guess. Next up, I read I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. So I was really excited for this book going into it because Ruta Sepetys is one of my favorite authors of all time, and she particularly writes historical fiction, but she writes different historical fiction that has a focus on history that isn't really told that much. And in this one in particular, it is set in Romania in 1989, and they are under communist rule, and it's just following day-to-day life for these characters as they are under this like really terrible regime. The main character ends up actually being blackmailed and is being used as a spy, but he's able to use that opportunity either to like actually be a spy, turn people he loves in, or he can use it to be one step ahead of the police and use it to help the people that he loves. So it's a really dangerous situation for him and really interesting as well. This is definitely, I think it was described as kind of a historical thriller, and it really is, but it's more of a quiet thriller. I feel like her writing has changed a lot recently, and not in a bad way at all, but this one was written very similarly to, in my opinion, to Fountains of Silence. And in that, I mean that the plot isn't like, it seems like you're just kind of reading about everyday life for a while, and then everything kind of comes together. So it's really smart writing is what I mean. And I've loved all of the things that I've read by her, but particularly her last 2 books have like really blown me away, because they're definitely focusing on more obscure parts of history and doing so in a way where you feel like you're just kind of being told this by someone who has experienced it. So this book was incredible. It like shows you what life was like, and powerfully does so, because you feel like you can relate to that main character, and these characters feel like everyone's spying on them, and like it's just such a dangerous world that they're living in, and it's so eerie to read about. I don't know, it was like an unsettling read, and it's kind of hard to describe in that way, but I felt like it taught me so much about what life was like for Romanians during that time period, and even just for Eastern Europe in general. And you have these characters who are watching all these like revolutions happen in countries that were in a similar situation to they are, and to the one that they're in. That wasn't proper English. But then you see them like, they're so afraid, and really fear is just what permeates this book. But I think that it is a super important read, definitely one that is worth picking up. It just hits all the levels. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, obviously, because it shows you so much of what life was like for these people, but it also shows you the regular things that you'd hear about, like romances that are blooming in the midst of everything that's happening, and fights between friends, but like they go so much deeper than like what my friends would fight about growing up. It's just like hard to imagine that this really happened, I guess. It was just such an eye-opening read. So I think it's definitely one to check out. Ruta Sepetys is an incredible author. If you haven't read anything by her, I highly encourage you to rectify that, because her books are just absolutely amazing. Next, I read the Gilded ones by Namina Forna. This was super interesting to listen to. I actually listened to the audiobook, and it was just so different. Like, I could really picture everything that was happening in this world. So essentially, it's in this world where your blood is supposed to run red, but then the main character, in this ritual where they see if that happens, her blood ends up running gold. So then she is an outcast, but then she ends up being recruited to actually be part of this army of other girls like her who their blood ran the same color, and they actually are an army that's defending the emperor. But there's so much more to the story than that. It was a super, super interesting fantasy story. Like, the creatures and everything, the world was super well built up, and I felt like I could picture everything about it. And I really felt for our main character. Like, reading about her, just, she was such a powerful character, honestly. This is really a feminist fantasy, because it's showing how these women, like, they have these special abilities, but then they also are being oppressed by men and like feared by men, and you see a lot of the clashing there. And I felt like it was really well done, because there were a lot of, once again, kind of layers to the story. It was very multifaceted. I felt like this book definitely lived up to all the expectations that I had for it, and the audiobook was really well done. It was very immersive, and I feel like if you enjoyed Raybearer, you would probably enjoy this one, because it kind of had like a similar main character who's very determined and is kind of put in a situation that they weren't really expecting to be in, and has some difficult decisions that they end up having to make in the midst of that. So I think this was a really, really strong fantasy debut. I mean, it doesn't read like a debut at all. It was great, and I definitely will be checking out more by this author. I don't think I'll be continuing with the series, just because I'm not a huge fan of series in general, like for the most part, but maybe. Speaking of that, actually, I ended up DNFing the Hawthorne Legacy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So I really liked the Inheritance games. I don't think this was bad. I just found myself, I was like halfway through it and I wasn't wanting to pick up a book and read, which really shows me that like I need to stop, you know? So I know that I could have gone and like read some notes about the first book, but I just found myself, I was like, I don't know, I can just look up spoilers and then find out what happens. I don't think I really care enough to read the sequel. And I feel like this is probably going to confuse so many people because there are certain sequels that I've loved. But for the most part, I've kind of realized, especially recently, I would rather read a new book and be exposed to a new world and new characters and a new story than go to a sequel, especially if I've waited a year for that sequel to come out. So in some ways, I feel like I probably should just like wait until all of the books in a series are out before I start it, but I also know I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I can't be explained. Sometimes I will read sequels, sometimes I won't. This was a case where I just didn't really feel like I wanted to. I just kind of was bored. Like, it's not the book's fault at all. This isn't really me like critiquing the book or speaking on the book or anything. It was just, I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to pick it up and I was over it. So I decided that I'm just gonna DNF it. I'm not gonna force myself through a series just for the sake of reading a series. I thought the first book was really cool. I enjoyed it a lot, but I just didn't want to continue. I also ended up DNFing By a Charm and a Curse by Jaime Questall. And I ended up DNFing this one because I really just, I didn't care for the way that the story started. And then there was a certain thing that happened that also is like just something that I don't like to read about, I don't like to hear about, I can't handle, and I just could not. So mostly though, my main issue with this one was how the story started. It was weird. I think that if you really liked Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, you might actually like this one because it kind of is a similar concept, but it was just very strange. Like, I don't know. I think this was kind of on the younger end of the YA spectrum, and it's just not one that's for me. I'm not really into younger reads anymore, like certain ones. It's too young for me, it's too cliche, and this kind of seemed like that. So it's set in a carnival, and there's like someone who gets stuck in a box, and then they have to find someone to take their place, but like they have to kiss them for them to take their place. I don't know, I wasn't really following. It's very early in the story. Like, I didn't get very far into this one at all. I'd say I got maybe like 10% or something. But the first thing that happens is that like this character, she kisses this random guy and then she ends up getting stuck in the box and she's just kind of like, oh, okay. And like, she's mad about it, but I don't think she's like sufficiently mad. So I was just kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe if I continued reading this, my opinion would change, but that just kind of set me off on the wrong note. So I just decided to give it up. You know, I only have so much time. I can only read so many books, so I'm not wasting time on something that I just feel meh about. I also technically didn't really read this one this year, but I'm gonna count it toward this year because I just am. So I technically tried to read this one last year, but I decided to DNF it in that big unhaul video that I did recently, and that is 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All by Laura Ruby. I tried to read this so many times last year, and I thought maybe it was because I was reading it while we were moving, so I was kind of distracted, just wasn't really into it. I don't know what it is. The point is, I was so confused by this book. Like, but even before reading it, when I was talking about the synopsis in videos, I was so confused by it. So then I was like, maybe when I read it, it's all gonna make sense to me, but no. That was not the case. It did not all make sense to me. I was mistaken. I was so confused about like which character I was reading about. I still don't really know which character is which. I know that one of them is dead and is like a ghost, and then the other character is in an orphanage, and I wasn't sure what was happening. So because it was just a really disjointed and like unpleasant reading experience, and once again one where I just didn't want to read, it was making me not want to read, I decided finally to DNF it. It took me a really long time because I thought maybe it was a me problem, but this seems like something I would enjoy. It's a historical fiction, a little bit different. That seems like something I would love, and usually National Book Award finalists, I usually do enjoy them. That's kind of a generalization, but it's just something that I've noticed with the ones that I have read. But this one it didn't work for me, unfortunately, but I gotta give it up at some point. Okay, and the last two books that I have to talk about are my Colleen Hoover reads. So I will be going more into depth, and then I also will be like if you want to see me vlogging the whole reading experience, then you can watch Monday's reading vlog. But basically for a whole week, I decided to just read Colleen Hoover books. So that is what I have been doing. And these are the ones that I've gotten through so far, which is only 2, but now, I mean, it's the weekend and I'll have a lot more time to read. So I'm hoping to get to like at least 2 more. But the first one that I finished is It Ends With Us. Now, I will preface this by saying I've read Ugly Love, Hopeless, Slammed. I think those are all the ones that I've read by her. I've had mixed feelings on her books, and it just kind of depends, you know? It's really a toss-up. I've realized I kind of like either really enjoy them or I hate them, which is whatever. This one is like the most hyped up of all time. I think it's this one and then maybe Ugly Love, but it's kind of hard to tell, but definitely this one is the most hyped up. I see it everywhere all the time, and I went into it not knowing anything about it, and I wouldn't say this is a romance story. I don't know if you like find it in the romance section of the bookstore, but I don't think that you should, because to me it's really not a romance story. It's a lot more than that. It's a story that's dealing with abuse, and I knew going into it that it was inspired by Colleen Hoover's own mother, and then knowing that the story was about abuse like made that hit home even more. So I think this was really well done. I think that the abuse plotline was handled very well, like in my personal opinion, and I felt like it came across with a very good message. It does kind of read like a typical romance in a way, which I liked. I felt like that was an intentional decision where the beginning of it reads like everything's happy-go-lucky, whatever, and it's just kind of that classic romance. But then you see kind of the holes like slowly poking through and things. And I thought that was really smart. So I'm kind of surprised that this is like the most hyped up by hers, because a lot of the things that are hyped up on TikTok are like really smutty, and I thought that that was why this one was hyped up, was because it was really smutty or like a really great relationship. But no, it's a very emotional story. So you kind of have 2 love interests in this story. I kind of wish that you had seen more of the one love interest, but I do understand that it wasn't the focus of this, and not having like that character be so prevalent allowed for that message to be brought across more effectively. And I know that there's a sequel, so I'd imagine that that one is going to be focusing more on that love interest that I would like to learn more about. But I'm still unsure about this one. I'm kind of having trouble with Colleen Hoover's writing a little bit. Like, I can deal with a certain level of cliche, and I feel like I say that, but then I probably read other like romance books and they're even more cliche, and I'm like, oh, whatever. But for some reason, like certain things with her books make me cringe. I can't stand the characters' names, and then there's certain things that happen that I'm like, ooh, I don't really like that. And this book did have a couple of those moments, but that's been kind of an ongoing theme with all of the books of hers that I've read. And probably if I reread the ones that I read a few years ago, I would probably have that same thought. But the writing being kind of cliche at times, that was a little bit like meh for me. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy this one. I think it would be a solid one to read. I feel like it had an effective message, and it was really interesting and different for her, and very different than anything that I've read before. So I enjoyed it. Do be aware that obviously domestic abuse is like the entire storyline, so trigger warning for that, and check out any other trigger warnings. But I see why people are talking about this one. It just does still kind of surprise me that this is like the most hyped up one. Okay, and the last book that I have to talk about today is Verity by Colleen Hoover. And this one I actually like just finished before starting to film this video. I was listening to the audiobook for this one. I was just about to talk about this domestic thriller book, but then Google thought I was talking to her, and then she started talking to me, and now I'm freaked out. So I don't want to say anything that like sounds like I'm saying, okay, Google. Anyways, the last book that I wanted to talk about is Verity by Colleen Hoover, which I just finished before this video, which is why that freaked me out so much. But this is a domestic thriller. So this is something that I never would have picked up, like absolutely not. It's just not my thing, not into it, not recommended by me, whatever. I keep on just falling into various TikToks. It's become a problem. But it's not my thing. I didn't really like Gone Girl. I haven't liked any of those books, like thrillers, mysteries. I'm not really into it. And especially because a lot of them have open-ended endings, and I just can't stand that. Like, certain ones I like, but most of them I can't. This one did have a pretty, like, for being open-ended, it was pretty conclusive. I was satisfied with the ending, but this was a wild ride. Like, maybe because I don't really read books like this very often, but I was like, there's so much happening here. And I was surprised. I never guess things. I am not the kind of reader who's like trying to put the pieces together while I'm reading. No, I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the brain power. That is not me. So I was really surprised by everything. It was very, very interesting reading this while also like reading her romance, because it's just so different, but the writing is also, it really suits it. This one didn't really have the cringy moments, which was really nice, because like I'm currently reading Confess, and that one has, in the beginning, a lot of cringy moments. I feel like a lot of the times they just start out with the cringy moments, but what I'm talking about is like his initials are OMG, and it's like this big joke between them, and I'm like, who looks at someone's driver's license and like looks at their initial? I don't. Is it just me? I don't know. But anyways, Verity is super interesting because this one is about an author who, she writes these like really popular books, and they're always from the antagonist point of view, and they're mysteries. And then we have this other writer who is the main character, and she's not very successful, but like the other author is super, super successful. But she ends up being asked by the publisher to finish off her series, finish off the last 3 books in the series, because the very famous author has gotten into a car accident and is unable to do anything anymore. But she ends up like moving in with the father, not the father, well, he does have a kid. She ends up moving in with the famous author's husband, but the famous author is also like still alive, so she's still there. She's just in like a vegetative state, and it's just like, you know, creepy things happening, like all of those things. So I like, it was weird. There were a lot of things that I was like, okay, I feel like I know where this is going, but it still did end up surprising me in the end. So it was very interesting. I'm still unsure entirely how I felt about it, but I don't regret having read it. It was pretty, like, it did blow my mind, and it's definitely one that I kind of need to think over a little bit more. So those are all the books that I've read recently that I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video, and let me know if you have read any of these books, your thoughts on them, because I would love to know. And I will see you guys in another new video soon. Bye!